The importance of education. Have you ever imagined attending a school where the lessons range from reciting poetry, learning to play the lyre, and then practicing wrestling? Welcome to the world of Athenian education. In ancient Athens, education wasn't just about preparing young people for a career or filling their minds with knowledge, it was about shaping citizens. The Athenian model of education aimed to cultivate the ideal citizen, someone who was not only knowledgeable and articulate, but also physically fit and morally upright. This holistic approach to education, which combined intellectual, physical, and artistic training, was deeply rooted in the Greek belief that a balanced individual was the foundation of a balanced society. For Athenians, education was more than a personal achievement, it was a civic duty. The city's future depended on the development of its youth, as they were expected to grow into the men who would make decisions for the polis city-state, defend its borders, and maintain its cultural traditions. Education was seen as the cornerstone of democracy, as it equipped citizens with the knowledge and skills necessary to participate in public life, whether in the assembly, the courts, or the military. But what exactly did Athenian youth learn, and how was their education structured? Let's dive into the fascinating world of Athenian schooling, where academic lessons blended seamlessly with physical training and cultural enrichment, creating a unique educational experience that has influenced the way we think about learning even today. In Athens, education was a key element in shaping not just individuals but the city-state itself. The Athenians believed that the well-being of the polis depended on the education of its citizens, particularly young boys who would grow up to become the statesmen, soldiers, and philosophers of the future. The goal was to create well-rounded individuals who could contribute to the democratic process, whether by participating in debates, leading military campaigns, or preserving Athens' rich cultural heritage. Unlike modern education systems, where the focus is often on specialization, Athenian education was designed to cultivate a wide range of skills. Young boys were expected to learn reading and writing, but also music, poetry, physical training, and moral philosophy. This balance between intellectual and physical development reflected the belief that a sound mind and a sound body was essential for living a virtuous and effective life. However, education in Athens was not free or universal. It was largely reserved for wealthier families who could afford private tutors or send their children to schools, while poorer children might only receive basic training. Additionally, education was primarily for boys, as girls were expected to be trained at home in domestic skills. So, while today's parents stress over math homework, Athenian parents were probably more worried about whether little Demetrius was nailing his poetry recital and wrestling moves in the same day. Central to the Greek concept of education was Paideia, a term that referred to the overall process of raising and educating children to be ideal members of society. Paideia encompassed not only academic learning, but also the development of character, ethics, and civic responsibility. For Athenians, this was not a rigid system, but rather an evolving philosophy that sought to balance the body, mind, and soul. From a young age, boys were taught to embody the virtues of Arete, or excellence, striving for moral, physical, and intellectual perfection. They were encouraged to think critically, question assumptions, and engage in the kind of dialogue that would later shape Athenian democracy. At the same time, they were trained to take care of their physical health, with regular participation in gymnastics and athletics, ensuring they could defend the polis if necessary. Athenian education wasn't just about the individual, it was about creating citizens who would uphold the values of the city and ensure its continued prosperity. Every boy was a potential leader, soldier, or thinker, and the educational system was designed to nurture these capacities in balance. The works of Homer, particularly the Iliad and the Odyssey, were cornerstones of Athenian education. These epic poems were seen not just as stories of adventure and heroism, but as moral guides that taught young Athenians about courage, honor, and the responsibilities of leadership. Boys were expected to memorize passages from Homer and recite them aloud, developing both their linguistic skills and their sense of moral duty. Homer's heroes, like Achilles and Odysseus, served as role models for young Athenians. Through their tales of bravery and sacrifice, boys learned about the importance of loyalty, duty to the community, and the pursuit of personal excellence. The recitation of poetry also helped develop their oratorical skills, which were essential for public speaking, a critical component of Athenian democracy. Beyond Homer, students would also be introduced to the works of other great poets and playwrights, such as Sophocles, Euripides, and Hesiod, whose works provided further reflections on ethics, politics, and the human condition. While education was central to Athenian life, it wasn't equally accessible to all. Wealthier families could afford private tutors and better resources, while poorer citizens often had to settle for more basic education or, in some cases, none at all. This created a clear division in Athenian society, where the elite youth were groomed to become future leaders, while the lower classes remained limited in their opportunities for social advancement. Girls, too, were largely excluded from formal education. Athenian society placed great emphasis on the domestic role of women, and girls were typically educated at home in skills related to household management, weaving, and child rearing. However, there were exceptions. Some wealthy families did provide their daughters with a more extensive education, particularly in areas like music and poetry. Despite these social limitations, education in Athens was still deeply respected and seen as the key to achieving personal and civic excellence. Whether a young boy aspired to be a soldier, a statesman, or a philosopher, education was the first step on the path to greatness. The Athenian school curriculum in ancient Athens, the education of young boys, was designed to foster the balance of body and mind. This meant that a typical day at school involved more than just reading and writing. Students were trained in music, gymnastics, poetry, and even basic military drills. The goal was to cultivate the ideal citizen, one who could think critically, express himself eloquently, and defend the city if necessary. For the Athenians, education was a lifelong pursuit of excellence both intellectually and physically. The Athenian school curriculum was structured around three main pillars: musical education, which included music and poetry; physical education, which involved gymnastics and athletic training; and literary education, focusing on reading, writing, and learning classical literature. These subjects were more than just individual areas of study. They were part of a holistic approach that sought to create a well-rounded, disciplined citizen capable of contributing to society in meaningful ways. For Athenians, music wasn't just an art form, it was considered essential for shaping the soul and building moral character. Boys were taught to play instruments such as the lyre and the aulos, a wind instrument similar to a flute, and they were expected to master the art of singing and poetry recitation. Music was thought to harmonize the soul, promoting virtues like self-discipline, harmony, and emotional balance. The lyre was the most common instrument taught in Athenian schools, and boys would spend hours learning how to play and sing the works of Homer and other poets. This wasn't just for entertainment. Poetry and music were seen as tools for teaching important lessons about life, ethics, and human nature. Reciting Homer's epics not only helped students develop their memory and rhetorical skills, but also instilled values like honor, courage, and respect for the gods. The Greeks believed that music was directly tied to moral education. As Plato famously wrote, the rhythms and melodies of music had a profound impact on the character of the listener. Music was thought to help develop the virtues of self-control and harmony, traits that were essential for a good life and for contributing to the well-being of the polis. While music trained the soul, gymnastics trained the body. Physical fitness was essential in Athenian education, as young boys were expected to grow into strong, healthy men capable of defending their city in times of war. Physical training, known as gymnastic, was considered just as important as intellectual education. Boys trained daily in various athletic disciplines, including running, wrestling, discus, and javelin throwing. Training took place at the palestra, a type of wrestling school and gymnasium where boys would learn wrestling techniques, boxing, and other forms of combat. Physical education wasn't just about individual fitness, it was about preparing boys to be ready for military service. The physical discipline instilled by gymnastics was also thought to sharpen the mind and build the mental toughness needed to excel in public life. Through these activities, boys learned teamwork, endurance, and the importance of self-control. The rigorous physical training was meant to build not only strength but also character traits that would be invaluable both on the battlefield and in the civic life of Athens. Of course, no Athenian education was complete without literary training. Boys began by learning to read and write, often using wax tablets and styluses for practice. They were taught the Greek alphabet and how to form sentences, progressing from basic literacy to reading more complex texts as they grew older. The core of their literary education centered on the works of Homer and other classical authors. Boys would memorize passages from the Iliad and Odyssey, reciting them aloud in front of their teachers and classmates. This wasn't just an exercise in memory, it was a way to learn the moral lessons embedded in these texts. Homer's epics were filled with stories of bravery, loyalty, and justice, and these values were expected to be internalized by the students. Beyond Homer, Athenian boys were also exposed to the works of other poets, playwrights, and philosophers. They studied the tragedies of Aeschylus and Sophocles and learned to appreciate the wisdom of philosophers like Heraclitus and Anaxagoras. By studying these great works, students were not only trained to be articulate and knowledgeable, but also to understand the deeper philosophical and ethical issues that shape Greek society. As they advanced in their education, boys would also learn rhetoric and oratory, the arts of persuasive speech. In a society where public speaking was crucial for participation in democracy, the ability to speak well was one of the most important skills a young man could acquire. At the heart of the Athenian education system was the pursuit of arete, or excellence. This concept wasn't limited to academic achievements, it referred to the development of all aspects of a person's character, including their physical abilities, intellectual skills, and moral virtues. Arete was the standard by which a citizen was judged, and every boy was expected to strive for it. Education was the first step on the path to arete. Boys were trained to be courageous in battle, eloquent in speech, and wise in their decision-making. They were taught to embody the virtues that would allow them to contribute to the well-being of Athens, whether as soldiers, statesmen, or philosophers. The pursuit of arete was seen as a lifelong endeavor, one that began in the classroom but continued throughout one's life. The Athenian approach to education reflected their belief that a person's development was never complete. There was always more to learn, more to achieve, and more to give back to society. In this way, education in Athens was about creating lifelong learners, individuals who were constantly seeking to improve themselves and their community. The role of teachers behind every well-educated Athenian youth was a network of teachers and tutors who played crucial roles in their development. Unlike modern schools with standardized curriculums and organized institutions, Athenian education relied on private tutors or small schools led by specialists in various disciplines. These educators included grammarians who taught reading and writing, sophists who specialized in rhetoric and debate, and philosophers who encouraged students to question the nature of existence, knowledge, and morality. Each of these teachers brought unique skills and perspectives to the educational experience. They were not just instructors, but also mentors, responsible for shaping the minds of the future leaders, soldiers, and thinkers of Athens. Their teaching styles, often centered on dialogue and debate, were designed to foster critical thinking, intellectual curiosity, and the ability to engage with complex ideas. Let's take a closer look at these key figures in Athenian education and how they influenced the formation of young minds. The first step in an Athenian boy's education was learning the basics of reading, writing, and arithmetic. This foundational education was usually provided by a grammarian, a teacher who specialized in the mechanics of language. Boys would begin their studies around the age of 7, starting with the Greek alphabet and gradually learning to read and write short sentences. Learning to write in Athens involved the use of wax tablets and styluses. The boys would practice forming letters and words by scratching them into the wax, a process that required patience and precision. Once they had mastered basic writing skills, students would move on to reading simple texts, often passages from Homer or other classical authors. The grammarian's role wasn't limited to basic literacy. As students advanced, they would begin to study grammar, syntax, and composition, skills that would be essential as they prepared for more advanced studies in rhetoric and philosophy. The grammarian laid the foundation for the intellectual growth of the student, ensuring that he could engage with the more complex texts and ideas that he would encounter later in his education. Imagine trying to learn your alphabet on a wax tablet. One slip of the stylus, and your turns into a squiggle. Erasing mistakes was more about patience than a handy backspace button. As boys progressed in their education, they would eventually come under the tutelage of a sophist. The Sophists were professional educators who specialized in teaching the art of rhetoric, the ability to persuade and argue effectively. In a society like Athens, where public speaking was crucial to political life, being able to craft a convincing argument was one of the most valuable skills a young man could learn. The Sophists were not just concerned with logic and debate structure, they taught their students how to appeal to emotions, how to sway an audience with well-placed metaphors, and how to anticipate and counter opposing arguments. They were masters of persuasion, and their lessons went far beyond simple public speaking. They encouraged their students to think critically about the nature of truth, justice, and virtue. However, the Sophists were also controversial. Some Athenians, particularly philosophers like Plato, criticized the Sophists for being more interested in winning arguments than in seeking the truth. To Plato, the Sophists represented a dangerous tendency to manipulate words and ideas for personal gain rather than for the common good. Nonetheless, many wealthy Athenians sent their sons to study with Sophists, as their teachings were seen as essential for success in the political arena. While the Sophists focused on winning arguments, the philosophers encouraged students to question everything, including the very nature of reality itself. Some of the greatest philosophical minds of ancient Greece, including Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, shaped the intellectual landscape of Athens through their schools and teachings. Socrates, with his famous Socratic method, didn't lecture his students. Instead, he asked them lots of questions. His goal wasn't to fill his students with knowledge, but to help them uncover the truth for themselves. He believed that through dialogue and constant questioning, students could challenge their assumptions and arrive at a deeper understanding of justice, morality, and the good life. Plato, a student of Socrates, took these ideas even further. In his academy, he taught his students to explore the world of abstract ideas, the realm of forms, and to think about the ideal versions of justice, beauty, and goodness. For Plato, education wasn't just about practical skills. It was about guiding students toward the ultimate truths of existence. Aristotle, Plato's student, had a different approach. He believed in empirical observation and encouraged his students to study the world around them, focusing on biology, politics, and ethics through practical means. His school, the Lyceum, emphasized the importance of systematic inquiry and classification, making Aristotle one of the first true scientists in history. Philosophers like Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle didn't just teach their students what to think, they taught them how to think. Their methods of inquiry laid the foundations for modern philosophy and critical thinking, and their influence on Athenian education was profound. While many Athenian boys attended public schools or studied with Sophists and philosophers, some of the wealthiest families hired private tutors to provide their sons with a more personalized education. These tutors were often highly respected scholars or former statesmen, and they tailored their lessons to meet the specific needs of their students. Private tutors were especially important for boys who were being groomed for political leadership. In addition to traditional subjects like reading, writing, and rhetoric, tutors would focus on ethics, diplomacy, and the art of governance. For these young men, education wasn't just about personal development, it was about preparing them for a life of leadership. Many of the most famous figures in Athenian history, including Pericles and Alcibiades, were educated by private tutors who helped shape them into the statesmen and military leaders they would later become. For these elite families, education was seen as an investment in both their sons' future and the future of Athens itself. Physical and moral education in ancient Athens, the education of young boys went far beyond learning to read, write, or debate. The Athenian model of education also placed a heavy emphasis on physical fitness and moral virtue, preparing boys to become not only educated citizens but also capable soldiers and ethical leaders. This dual focus on the body and soul reflected the Greek belief that a true citizen needed to excel both physically and morally to contribute meaningfully to society. While the intellectual education provided the tools for boys to engage in public life, whether in the courts, the assembly, or the marketplace, their physical training ensured that they were prepared to defend the polis. The Athenians understood that the survival of their city depended on the strength of its citizen soldiers, and therefore, boys were trained from an early age to develop their physical endurance and martial skills. Alongside this, they were taught the virtues of honor, courage, and self-discipline, which were considered essential for both soldiers and leaders alike. At the heart of Athenian physical education was gymnastics, which wasn't simply about exercise for the sake of health. It was considered a moral discipline that shaped both body and character. From a young age, boys would begin attending the palestra, a type of gymnasium where they were taught a variety of athletic skills, including wrestling, boxing, running, and discus throwing. These activities were designed to build strength, endurance, and agility, all of which were necessary for success both on the battlefield and in civic life. Physical education wasn't just about becoming fit, it was deeply connected to the development of virtue. The Greeks believed that physical discipline encouraged self-control and mental clarity, and that a well-trained body was essential for a well-trained mind. Gymnastics also instilled a sense of teamwork and sportsmanship, as boys learned to compete honorably with one another while respecting the rules of the games. The focus on competitive athletics was also a reflection of the Greek love of competition, or agon, which permeated all aspects of life. Athletic contests, whether at local festivals or the Grand Olympic Games, were seen as opportunities to prove one's excellence, arete, and gain honor for oneself and one's city. For Athenian boys, physical training was as much about developing moral character as it was about preparing for war. You think your gym class was tough? Try doing a full day of wrestling, running, and javelin throwing under the hot Mediterranean sun, knowing you'd better win or at least look good trying. Physical education in Athens wasn't just about building a strong body, it was also about preparing boys to serve as soldiers. From the age of 18, young Athenian men underwent 2 years of military training known as the Ephebic service, during which they were taught the skills necessary to defend their city. This training included mastering the use of weapons, practicing combat tactics, and learning to fight as part of the hoplite phalanx, the highly organized infantry formation that was the backbone of the Athenian army. The Ephebs, young men undergoing military training, were expected to participate in rigorous drills, including marching, swordsmanship, and spear fighting. They were also taught the art of archery and the handling of light weapons, which were crucial for the defense of Athens and its surrounding territories. This training was often supervised by experienced military leaders who instilled in their students the importance of courage, loyalty, and discipline. The goal of the Ephebic service wasn't just to produce good soldiers, it was to create well-rounded citizens who understood their responsibility to protect their city. The military training also reinforced a sense of civic duty, as the defense of the polis was seen as the ultimate expression of patriotism and honor. Alongside physical and military training, Athenian boys were expected to cultivate moral virtue. The concept of arete, or excellence, was central to Athenian education, and it referred not just to physical prowess or intellectual skill, but also to the moral qualities that defined a good citizen. Boys were taught from an early age to develop traits like courage, temperance, justice, and wisdom, which were considered the pillars of a virtuous life. Moral education was often tied to the stories of heroes from Greek mythology and history. Boys would learn about the legendary feats of heroes like Achilles, Theseus, and Heracles, and they were encouraged to emulate their bravery and sense of duty. These stories weren't just entertainment, they were moral lessons, teaching boys the importance of standing up for what was right, even in the face of danger. Boys were also taught the importance of self-restraint and moderation, virtues that were highly prized in Athenian society. The ideal citizen wasn't just someone who could win battles or outwit an opponent in debate, he was someone who could control his passions and make decisions based on reason and justice. This idea of moral balance was a key component of both Athenian ethics and education. An essential part of the education system in Athens was preparing young men for their role in public life. Once they completed their military training and reached adulthood, they were expected to participate actively in the political life of the city. Whether serving as soldiers, statesmen, or jurors in the city's courts, Athenian men were required to take responsibility for the governance and protection of the polis. Education was viewed as the pathway to becoming a fully engaged citizen, and this extended beyond physical and intellectual training. Athenian boys were taught to respect the laws of the city, to uphold the values of democracy, and to contribute to the common good. Participation in the ecclesia assembly and the Helii courts was both a privilege and a duty, and boys were prepared from an early age to take on these responsibilities. Moral education also emphasized the importance of justice and fairness in public life. Boys learned that being a good citizen wasn't just about defending the city in battle, it was about making wise decisions that benefited the entire community. Whether serving as a judge or a politician, the ability to act with integrity and impartiality was seen as the hallmark of a truly educated man. The legacy of Athenian education, the education system of ancient Athens, with its focus on cultivating well-rounded citizens, has left a profound and lasting legacy. Although the world has changed dramatically since the days of Socrates, Plato, and Aristotle, many of the core principles of Athenian education, emphasizing the balance between physical, intellectual, and moral development, continue to shape modern educational philosophies. From the structure of today's schools to the very concept of liberal arts education, the echoes of the Athenian model can be heard in classrooms around the world. Modern education, though more specialized and formalized, still carries the imprint of the holistic approach that was at the heart of Athenian schooling. The idea that education is about more than just academic achievement, that it should also prepare individuals to be active citizens, critical thinkers, and morally responsible individuals is a key aspect of both ancient and contemporary educational systems. One of the most obvious ways Athenian education has influenced modern systems is through the liberal arts tradition. In Athens, education was about creating individuals who were knowledgeable in a wide variety of subjects, from poetry and music to rhetoric and philosophy. This emphasis on a broad, well-rounded education is the foundation of what we now call the liberal arts, a model that encourages students to explore diverse disciplines and develop a wide range of skills. The liberal arts education that dominates many universities today has its roots in the Athenian belief that a person's education should encompass many fields of knowledge rather than focusing too narrowly on a single subject. The goal is to create graduates who are not only specialists in their chosen area, but also capable of thinking critically across disciplines, drawing connections between different areas of study, and engaging in civic life with a broader understanding of the world. In Athens, this type of education prepared young men to be effective leaders and citizens, and in modern times, it continues to prepare students for the complexities of contemporary society. The skills that Athenian boys learn in their classrooms, critical thinking, persuasive communication, and the ability to engage with philosophical questions, are the same skills that liberal arts programs aim to foster in students today. Another lasting legacy of Athenian education is the emphasis on physical fitness as an essential part of personal development. The Athenians believed that a sound mind could only exist in a sound body, and thus physical training was a core component of their education system. Today, this belief is reflected in the inclusion of physical education paid programs in schools around the world. Modern paid classes, with their focus on building strength, endurance, and teamwork, can trace their origins back to the gymnastics training of ancient Greece. The Athenians saw physical fitness not only as a way to prepare young men for military service, but also as a means of cultivating self-discipline and mental clarity. Today, physical education is valued for its ability to promote healthy lifestyles and teach life skills such as perseverance and cooperation, echoing the goals of Athenian education. Even the structure of modern athletic competitions and team sports has roots in the ancient world. The Olympic Games, which originated in Greece, were a celebration of physical excellence and competition, concepts that are still very much alive in school sports programs and international athletic events today. Athenian education placed great emphasis on the cultivation of virtue and the preparation of boys to become active citizens. This focus on developing moral character and a sense of civic responsibility has deeply influenced modern educational systems, particularly in the areas of civics and ethics. In Athens, boys were taught the virtues of justice, courage, temperance, and wisdom, and they were expected to apply these virtues both in their private lives and in their public roles as citizens. Modern education continues this tradition by integrating character education and civics lessons into school curricula, teaching students about their rights and responsibilities as citizens, the importance of fairness, and the value of contributing to the common good. Courses in civics and social studies encourage students to think critically about the role they play in society, much like the way Athenian boys were prepared to take part in the democratic process. The goal is the same: to create informed, responsible citizens who are capable of ethical decision-making and active participation in public life. Perhaps one of the most significant contributions of Athenian education to the modern world is the Socratic method, a form of teaching that encourages critical thinking through questioning and dialogue. Developed by Socrates, This method involves asking probing questions to stimulate students' critical thinking and challenge their assumptions. Rather than simply imparting knowledge, the Socratic method encourages students to engage in self-discovery and arrive at their own conclusions. Today, the Socratic method is widely used in law schools, philosophy classes, and even in debate clubs, where students are trained to think deeply and argue their points effectively. It's a teaching style that doesn't just focus on finding the right answer, but on exploring the reasoning process behind an argument. The goal is to develop students' abilities to analyze, question, and evaluate complex issues from multiple perspectives. In classrooms around the world, from high schools to universities, teachers continue to use Socratic questioning to guide students toward deeper understanding, encouraging them to ask not just what or how, but why. This legacy of Athenian education fosters independent thought, curiosity, and a lifelong love of learning. If you've ever had a professor who answered your question with another question, you can thank Socrates. He made the frustratingly effective method famous thousands of years ago. The legacy of Athenian education is alive and well in modern schools, universities, and even public life. From the liberal arts tradition to the inclusion of physical education, the emphasis on moral character, and the continued use of the Socratic method, many of the principles that guided the education of Athenian boys are still relevant today. The Athenian model of education, which sought to cultivate well-rounded individuals capable of contributing to the polis, has evolved into a system that prepares students to face the challenges of modern society. Whether through fostering critical thinking, encouraging active citizenship, or promoting physical and mental well-being, the values of Athenian education continue to shape the way we think about learning, character development, and civic responsibility. So, as you navigate your own educational journey, remember that many of the ideas you encounter, from the importance of a well-rounded education to the value of questioning, have their roots in the schools and gymnasiums of ancient Athens. The Athenians may not have had Wi-Fi or standardized tests, but their vision for education laid the groundwork for much of what we still value today.
By my side, intense, strong, no fear to face, nowhere to hide, intense. I subscribe to this channel, click like today, because content like this just lights my way. Intense and slow.